we're going to start in the Premier League, and we're going to focus on a man who, well, as you said yourself before this podcast, Mike, he is much maligned. I find that Steve Bruce spends most of his time trying to convince people that he's a good manager.
Yeah, he's funny. It's funny, you see, he's going to keep Newcastle up again this season. And, he just hits par. He's hitting par in his 2 seasons that he's had in charge. Yet he never seems to get, there just never seems to be much praise for him or respect for the job that he's doing. He's either in the middle of a crisis or, he's just doing what's expected. And there's no, they're the two modes. And I just find him a curious manager because I think a lot of his qualities, I think a lot of the things that make him a good manager, things that go unseen, that go behind the scenes. I think it's a lot to do with people skills. And I think just the kind of skills that he brings, we all like managers that are like ourselves, or we see traits in managers that we aspire to and things. And we like to see the logic in what they do, the tactical side of things and stuff like that. But with Steve Bruce, what he brings to the table and the manager, the people out there that are like Steve Bruce, aren't the sort of people that aren't going to campaign for Steve Bruce. They're just keeping everything on an emotional even keel and not really getting, not the sort of people who keyboard warriors coming out defending him or anything like that. So it just feels like not really many people are out there defending Steve Bruce's corner. So maybe this is a chance to give him a bit of love.
He does also, though, seem to have a habit of choosing quite difficult jobs, doesn't he, though? There was a time as well, Mike, actually, when he had a reputation for job hopping. He went from club to club to club, settled for quite some time at Sunderland, and now finds himself, of course, at Newcastle after a very brief stint at Sheffield Wednesday. But yeah, he's had an awful lot of clubs, so there are an awful lot of fans familiar with him. But as you say, not a huge amount convinced by him. But actually, when you look at his record, he's done all right for most of them.
Yeah, we talk about real world experience, and I mean, he's certainly not afraid of a challenge. You talk about the clubs he's managed, but the fact he's gone to rival clubs as well. He's managed Sheffield United and Sheffield Wednesday. He's managed Birmingham and Aston Villa. He's managed Sunderland and Newcastle. I mean, he's been on both sides of all these rivalries. There's really not much he hasn't seen before. All those years playing for Manchester United as a captain in, the first successful Sir Alex Ferguson team. And, he is a manager that uses real world experience as his way of moving through the world and learning about the world. So there's not much experience he can't call upon previously. There's not many situations he hasn't been in before. This is all really valuable stuff. But yes, because I think the main thing is because he doesn't do anything inspirational. He doesn't come out and talk tactics. He's not a visionary in any way, shape or form. And he doesn't excite people with the things he has to say to the cameras. He's just Steve Bruce. He's just like a nice bloke from down the pub who just happens to be managing Newcastle United. And I just find it a really strange one. But like you say, he's certainly not shy of a challenge. And given the stuff that he has to deal with at many of the clubs he's been at, and I wouldn't say effortless way, because sometimes you can see the pain on his face and the things that he's going through. But he just does seem to navigate things very comfortably, and I think it's credit to him, absolutely.
And you mentioned tactics there. One of the things that is often thrown at him, and to be honest, I think he probably doesn't help himself here with this, because he said several times, I don't really look at tactics. He's got a team, of course, who deal with that on the training ground. But if I was a manager of a football club and I wanted to get the fans on side, I don't think I'd be throwing around sentences like, "Oh, I'm not too worried about tactics."
Yeah, he doesn't tick any of the boxes of what excites fans, and that's it. You're right. He doesn't help himself in that respect. But I think it also says a lot about his qualities, that he understands that that's not his strength. That's not his flow state. It's not his biggest talent or his skill. He's aware from experience of what works and what doesn't in certain situations. But he's not a visionary. He's not someone he's not someone who relishes sitting down and preparing for the next game. So he gets in the backroom staff to support him to do that. And, we talk about, Eric Black's been a long-term assistant for him, Colin Calderwood. These are experienced figures, very undervalued or lesser known names within the game. But they obviously put on good enough sessions, they prepare teams well enough, because Steve Bruce gets results despite his own admission that he's not a tactical genius. And it's, you know, his skill set is dealing with the emotions of players and keeping players in a space for them to go out and perform on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday, whenever it might be. Just go out and be the best that they can possibly be. And I think one of the best things you can say about Steve Bruce as a manager is he's never lost a dressing room. I don't think he's ever lost a player. You know, we talk about managers that, you know, dressing rooms can be volatile places and can soon turn on a manager when things aren't going well. I don't think it's ever happened to Steve Bruce that a player's ever come out and said a bad word about him, or a dressing room's ever seemingly down tools on him. So, you know, even though these are things that all go under the radar, you know, it's silent evidence. It's things we don't see. These are all of his strengths. And it's not coincidence. His longevity in the game. We talk about millennials and the change of generation of players. His longevity in the game and the consistency of, you know, at least just doing enough, but he's got a load of promotions on his CV. You know, you can't grumble at that CV. He's obviously a lot more to him than what is appreciated from the outside looking in.
At first, it's easy to think that, you know, Steve Bruce doesn't give you a lot, doesn't give you too many, you know, he's certainly not your Ian Holloway when it comes to sound bites. But actually, when you dig a little bit deeper, there's loads of really interesting quotes. There's loads of really good and interesting stuff. We talked about the tactical admission that he makes. But I also noticed, and you talk about people skills there, Mike, that one thing he said, and this was about 3 years ago, and he may have said it before that as well, but he said, one thing I make sure of when I come into a club is that everyone down to the tea lady, I make sure that they don't have to do anything that I wouldn't want to do myself. So people pleasing is clearly his biggest strength, isn't it?
Yeah, and I guess that sums him up to a T. Really, you know, he understands what motivates people, and you know, he puts himself in the shoes of other people, and how would I feel in that situation? And I think he really resonates with people's situations for the smallest things that might be going on in their lives away from the pitch, or you know, whether it's how performances might be affecting them, or whether it's something that's happening in their home lives away from the game. There's a huge amount of compassion it has for players, but all backroom staff, you know, and everybody's valuable behind the scenes. And, you know, I think, you know, you hear stories about some managers, and, you know, you hear rumours come out of clubs that, you know, a manager's not a very nice person if you're not in his close-knit circle, or you're not one of the big players, or you're not, you know, he's got no time for it. And you just can't imagine that with Steve Bruce. You can imagine that everybody behind the scenes can have a conversation with him at various points. You know, even if they're nothing really to do with the first team, probably says hello to everyone. And he's just got them, you know, he's just got those affable qualities that, you know, that do go a long way ultimately in any workplace. You know, if you've got the goodwill of everybody within a building, then, you know, it's half the battle to know that everybody behind the scenes, it wants to do well for you. So, yeah, I think that's, you know, it's a very underrated quality in management. It's not very sexy. It's not easy to quantify. It's not easy to, you know, but when somebody's been doing this for 20 odd years now and consistently just getting results now like they were then, and has evolved the way that the game has evolved, then, you know, we've gone through periods of the game where we've had this big analytics boom, and we've had video analysis come through with Prozone and all these different things that have evolved in football. Yet the qualities that Steve Bruce brings to the table behind the scenes and what he does for players, kind of eternal qualities. It doesn't matter how much the game changes. People want to be treated well. They want to be respected and treated like people, and feel like they're cared about.
Actually, it's interesting you talk about that and mention that at the end, because he's been asked a few times about the science that has come in and the data and all this. I think he used the word newfangled, which probably tells you where he stands on this. But he was asked about it, and he keeps saying, "Oh, yeah, you've got to embrace it. You've got to accept it. It's, you know, it's the way the game changes." But he always keeps coming back to saying, "But you've got to remember where we came from. You've got to remember the basics, and you've got to remember that at the end of the day, in the changing room, you've got to inspire these lads." That's what he keeps saying. So clearly, he doesn't feel like he's fully 100% on board with it, but he knows it's there.
Yeah, it's alien to him. It is his blind. This is his blind spot. You know, it's his outer world logic and machines and technology and advances and things that make things happen quicker or that do things. Basically, our processes. Anything that makes our processes faster and more sophisticated and things like that. This is all a blind spot for Bruce. You know, he's very old-fashioned in that sense. But the counter to that is that he's like a buffer for any emotional garbage that might be picked up by the players. He's almost like, you know, the suspension on a car that takes the bumps in the road, that deals with it all and shields players and shields people around to just make sure that everybody's happy. And that, you know, this is you don't get one side without the other. The reason he has this as a blind spot is because he excels at this unseen quality of just, you know, it's such a turbulent club, Newcastle United. And I think it even shocks him. It's his hometown club. He's managed all these different clubs in all these big cities. You know, there's not much he hasn't encountered. Yeah, I think he still looks perplexed, even this season, in his second season, that everything's just suddenly a crisis at Newcastle. And he can never just, you know, it never seems to be able to do the job on its own terms for long before the next crisis comes along and everything's blown out of proportion. So, you know, I think this is his biggest challenge, I think, even in his own career. But it's probably the least romantic, you know, old school experienced manager managing his boyhood club. Couldn't get less romantic than Steve Bruce at Newcastle.
Last week we talked about Wayne Rooney and we talked about the experiences that he gained at Manchester United, particularly working under Sir Alex Ferguson. And Steve Bruce is another one that constantly refers back to his time at Old Trafford and speaks about the influence of Sir Alex Ferguson, and often talking about the fact that he was there before any of the players every day. He was there long after the players had gone home, and just the attitude that he had to managing and the everything that he instills in the players. So yeah, a lot of these managers now come back to Sir Alex Ferguson, but Steve Bruce was one of the first, wasn't he, to break out and start managing a club, and he had a terrible record against Sir Alex Ferguson whenever he came up against him, but he clearly took a lot on board during that time.
Yeah, and I mean, you can draw plenty of similarities with Wayne Rooney, but whereas we talked about Rooney last week, maybe not being able to identify with players because he had such a drive and such confidence in himself that he couldn't kind of put himself in the shoes of his players who didn't have that same level of drive and confidence. I think with Bruce, it's all empathy. It's all, you know, he's a big, like, sympathetic streak to him that makes him able to identify with players. And I think that's probably what separates them, you know, in terms of that side of, you know, that emotional side of things. But I think Bruce is, you know, I think he is tireless. I think he is, you know, puts all the hours in that God sends, but also, you know, he's just got this sheer drive that keeps him going and keeps him coming back no matter what the circumstances, no matter how difficult the job gets. He's just, you know, he's almost like, he's just like a puppy that keeps coming back for more kind of thing. You know, it doesn't matter how much you try to kick him and put him down. He just keeps getting up off the canvas and coming back for more. And I think potentially that quality in itself possibly rubs off on players or is admired by players. The fact that he can take so much on his shoulders and just, you know, it doesn't change the type of person that he is. He never becomes embittered by it, or, you know, he never brings it into work. And, you know, he is very in the moment in that sense that, you know, tries to leave behind when a result's gone, it's gone, and we come into training and we just enjoy training on the day, and then we all prepare for the next game. And we try not to carry this cloud around with us. And that's kind of what I think he sees his job as, is just to make sure that these clouds don't gather. And as soon as I see a sign of it, you know, my job is to protect the players and shield them from this kind of pressure that might be coming from external sources.
One of the things he also said is when he was asked about what he does pre-match, and managers obviously never want to give away too much, but he said, I only give 2 or 3 maximum clear messages to the players because I don't want to cloud their thoughts. I don't want to overload them pre-match. I just want to give simple and clear messages and let them go out there and do their thing, which is interesting because, you know, judging by what we said earlier, he's not going to be giving, you know, tactical detail on the opponent, but clearly whatever those 2 or 3 nuggets of information are, they're clearly absolutely vital.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's beauty in simplicity, isn't there? We talk, we want from the outside, we want to be impressed. We want you to do something really imaginative and special and tactically innovative, and then come and tell us all about it and share it with us as well. But that's not what Bruce is about. Bruce is about keeping things simple, because if you overload players, they're not going to be at the best. They're not going to feel good about themselves. And ultimately, that's what Steve Bruce is trying to conjure up in his players. He remembers when he was a player, what made me feel at my best. And too much for him, clearly, information overload was something that probably, if he had too much to think about during a game, he'd make mistakes. So he understands that. And the simpler I keep the message for the players, the more they can go out there and enjoy the football. And, they've got themselves to this level in their profession. They're here for a reason, because they're good enough to be at this level. And so long as I don't overload them, so long as I don't put pressure on them that doesn't need to be there, leave players to their own devices. Don't meddle, don't butt in too much, and don't upset them as almost as artists. If I don't interfere too much, then their individual expression is able then to come out. So my job is the less involved I get, the better job I'm doing, is the way that Bruce will be looking at things.
We can't go much further. Well, we are going to mention something else in a minute, but, I just want to sort of touch upon current form, and in particular, the victory against Leicester on Friday night, which, considering the short price that was available on Leicester and the fact that everywhere you looked, people were tipping the Foxes to win that easily. Newcastle have been showing plenty going forward recently. They have been scoring goals. Now, a lot of people are attributing this to players returning, and that is true. But once again, everyone's kind of bypassing Bruce on this one and saying, well, it must be because of the returnees.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think it is, but has played a big part. The flip side to that is, when Bruce was saying earlier in the season, it's tough without attacking players to be creative. We've got some of our best attacking players are on the sidelines. So we're finding it difficult at the moment. And, but there was no empathy for Bruce at that moment in the season. Yet the players come back, it's the players that get the credit. It's like this is a very one-sided relationship, whichever way you look at it, in terms of the outside world and Steve Bruce, the manager, he's definitely getting the short end of the wedge in almost everything. But there's another point there that's interesting as well, was earlier this season, and it went on for quite a while, and it became a point of debate that I noticed on social media as well, was about the change of formation that Newcastle went with. And it kind of stunned people. It's another stick to beat Bruce with, that he said, I've been wanting to play this formation all season, and we've talked about introducing this, but the players didn't want it, so I didn't go with it. And people were kind of jumping on it like, that's poor management. That's, criticising for it, that you're the manager. You're supposed to tell the players what to do. And it's like, well, no, this is honouring what the players' wishes, what they want. I wanted to go, I think it was 2 or 3-5-2, or, it was something to do with playing 2 up front. But the players weren't comfortable with it. There were certain players within the team that weren't going to be comfortable with the shape. And he was worried about how much it would upset the emotional dynamic if he imposed it on the players. But it reached a point, because he had enough credit in the bank, there were so many losses on the bounce, and it was like, right, lads, we're going to have to go my way now. You do understand, I've given this as long as I can. And then they went with the way that he wanted to go, and then suddenly results started to pick up. And that's when Bruce came out and said, I've been wanting to do this for a while, kind of possibly defending himself against earlier defeats. And then straight away, it's the criticism of Bruce because, well, that's bad management. Why didn't you do this sooner? And it's just like, completely disregarding, it's like just a complete oversight that there's an emotional side to this. It's not just about, going in as a tactician and coming up with all this fantastic logic that makes you look brilliant.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? That he cannot seem to win whichever direction he goes in. He's also, as you say, juggling the dynamics of pleasing the fans, but also the owners as well. They've had these rumors of takeovers for so long, failed, back it comes, and it kind of goes away and nobody hears about it for a while. And he's constantly asked questions about this in his press conferences pre-match. He must be sick and tired of it. He must be sick and tired of trying to juggle all these plates and please everyone and say one thing and make sure the fans don't get too cheesed off that, et cetera, et cetera. Just he must at times get home after a busy day and just collapse because he's keeping so many plates spinning, isn't he? And, you know, pleasing people is tiring work.
Well, I think Mike Ashley is the root source of most of this. And the reason why Bruce has obviously never been totally accepted in the role is because he replaced Rafa Benitez. And Rafa Benitez built up a rapport with the Newcastle fans. They thought they had a manager they could buy into, but it was a manager that was also outspoken, who talked about a future without Ashley, as if Ashley was, you know, kind of making it plain that Ashley was probably an obstacle to Newcastle's progress going forward. But then you kind of have to ask other questions. And Newcastle fans probably won't like this, but from the outside, an outsider's perspective and a logical, non-emotional perspective. Now look at this from Mike Ashley's point of view. Where is the ceiling? You know, if Mike Ashley's not going to invest fortunes into Newcastle on the budget, he kind of had a go at that at the beginning and then it all went sour. So now he's just made it clear, I'm not going to invest fortunes in the club. And we can just tread water above the relegation zone year after year after year. I'm happy with that. We collect on the money every year and so on. Steve Bruce is not a downgrade on Rafa Benitez in that regard. He's working with the same resources. He's getting the same results. There's just a lot less satisfaction around St. James's Park in the process. But the bottom line, and that is all Ashley cares about, is the bottom line, is the same. Now, this doesn't help Bruce, you know, and I think it's the best for all concerned that Newcastle find a new owner, eventually it goes through and the club can start to look forward. But as it stands right now, you know, there is a ceiling to what Newcastle are capable of. And this is not to say that Steve Bruce is a manager that is ever really capable of becoming a top half Premier League manager with the budget. I think he is just a manager that just manages. You know, you give him what you give him and he just manages. He doesn't conjure up anything special. He just keeps everyone happy. He keeps a happy camp. He keeps everything ticking along. And whatever par is, then that's kind of, all right, set your benchmarks at par and he'll hit par. And that's what Steve Bruce is, a manager. But he can do it at so many different levels. He can do it to make a promotion. He can do it to survive in the Premier League and can do it despite getting absolutely no credit and getting pelters every time he takes a wrong turn that people don't like. But for the club that Newcastle are right now, you know, they haven't necessarily gone as far backwards as the Newcastle public would like to think. And, you know, that's credit to Steve Bruce that despite all the sort of prophecies of doom that, they're destined for relegation and, you know, that this has got to be the season that they go down, he keeps digging out results. When is it? There's just these crucial periods where it all falls into place. They dig out a few results and then everything's, you know, back to the even keel that Bruce likes to keep it on all the time. So, you know, I think, like I say, Mike Ashley is the root source of all Newcastle United's problems, but that's not Steve Bruce's fault. Yet that's why Bruce finds himself in this position, this thankless job that he's doing, which for him, ultimately, I think he's just grateful to Ashley for giving him the shot at his dream job with his hometown club. But it's been a thankless task every step of the way.
That wasn't so bad. When you opened it up and said Newcastle fans aren't going to like this, I thought, uh-oh, here we go. We're going to have the block button ready on Twitter this week. But that wasn't so bad, Mike. Interestingly, you mentioned comparisons with Rafa Benitez. Now, he doesn't obviously have as good a record as Rafa Benitez, but he, you know, of the last sort of 5 or 6 Newcastle managers, Steve Bruce's record, particularly defensively, is one of the best. Now, he keeps coming out every now and again and talking about that he's going for these new attacking philosophies. And that is exactly what the fans want to hear. You know, that is music to any football fans here, isn't it, really? They never quite materialize. And you kind of get back to this, you know, we're just trying not to lose mentality halfway through the season. But you can't knock his defensive record, not just here at Newcastle, but going back, you know, his sides are always difficult to play against.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think back to last season, you know, they pretty much had one tactic, and it was Alan Saint-Maximin on the counter. And, you know, it was soak up pressure and just unleash that pace into a half a pitch worth of space. And it worked a treat. And I think if you find something that's working, stick with it. And, you know, he's not an innovator. He's loath to change. If something works, stick with something that's working. And, you know, you don't, you know, it's, again, it goes back to his experience, I think. And, you know, he's been in so many different scenarios and situations. I think you just get a sense for when change is necessary. And you don't change something too quickly if it's going to work. And I think that this also kind of goes back to the fact that, you know, you talk about him potentially being exhausted, that he has, but I think he is tireless. I just think he can take it. I just think that inner drive that he's got means that he can take all the brickbats. He can take all the, you know, all the baggage that comes with the week to week. He can stand firm. And I think possibly it's his capacity to stand firm when everybody's calling for change, do this different, do that different. And he can just come and front it out and do nothing different, but take all the brickbats at the same time and make the players feel shielded. Again, it comes back to the point of not overloading the players with too much information. If you change system 4 or 5 times in a season, you kind of lose an identity at that point. And although it's not much fun losing most weeks in the Premier League if you're in the bottom 6 like Newcastle are, you know, you don't dig out results you don't go through this little purple patch of winning at Burnley and beating West Ham and winning away at Leicester all within the space of 3 or 4 weeks if there's not some underlying identity that's been stuck with when things weren't particularly well. You know, there's underlying principles there that you don't just change for the sake of change and lose identity in the process.
Finally then, where do you see this progressing to? Because we know he doesn't stay at clubs that long, but he's been, you know, on Tyneside for quite some time now, Steve Bruce. Where do you see the future? I think I know the answer because you've sort of already covered it. But, you know, I guess is it completely takeover dependent, do you think?
Yeah, I think, you know, if I had to predict Newcastle season next season, is Mike Ashley will stay in charge for the entire season. Steve Bruce will stay in charge for the entire season. They'll flirt with the bottom 3 for most of it. They'll have 3 or 4 purple patches in the season that mean they finish 16th. And it'll just be, you know, I'd repeat ad nauseum.